Story 1. I was on a team in high school for 4 years and got close with the other girls. We all hung out all the time. We decided to go bowling together. One of the girls, who we had spent hours a week with for years and talked about everything with, showed up with her own shoes, gloves, bag, and bowling ball and scored near a professional level. She had never mentioned bowling to any of us, even once, not even when we were making plans to go bowling. Story 2. I found out that a longtime golf buddy of mine was a professional ballroom dance teacher in his previous years. The guy weighs over 300 pounds and just didn't give off ballroom dancer vibes. My wife of 10 years used to work for Arthur Murray Dance Schools and didn't believe he knew how to dance. So she invited him and his wife over for dinner. Boy, was she wrong. My golf buddy twirled her, dipped her, the whole 9 yards, as both I and his wife stood there with our jaws on the floor. After going through 7 different dances with my wife, he twirled her one last time toward me and said, "Told you so." We had a great dinner, and I learned something new about the 300-pound Samoan that I golf with every weekend. Story 3. In my youth, I learned that my friend of 6 or 7 years was a Jehovah's Witness. I had no idea. One day, while talking to him, I asked if he was ready for Christmas, and he said no. That's when he told me he was a Jehovah's Witness. Later, I found out that he was the reason why, every time the Jehovah's Witnesses went up and down the street in our neighborhood, they always skipped my house. Story 4. When my best friend died, I learned that I never knew her at all. She was a pathological liar. She told me that she was born in New Zealand and moved to the United States when she was 2. In reality, she was born and raised in New Jersey. She said her middle name was different than the one on her obituary. The most unbelievable lie was that she had a younger sister who was hit by a car as a toddler and died. She had a tattoo of roses that she claimed was for her little sister. Every year on a specific day in November, she would fall apart crying, saying it was her sister's date of death. That sister never existed. Story 5. A good friend of mine, whom I had known for over 20 years, died in 2021 from COVID-19. I noticed many children at the funeral whom I did not know. I asked who they were and was told they were his children. He had told me he had no kids, but he actually had 10 children. 10 children. Story 6. My grandfather was always jumpy around thunderstorms. We assumed it was because he was shot down during the war and it sounded like anti-aircraft fire. However, it turns out that when he was a teenager, he was struck by lightning. The craziest part is that this happened the day before he started dating my grandmother. She had never heard that story. Story 7. I worked summers as a ticket booth operator at a minor league baseball stadium for around 3 years. The owner was a really nice elderly man in his mid to late 80s who always showed up in a wheelchair, accompanied by his daughter. He rewarded his employees with bonuses for good work. He even gave me $300 once for helping cash out one of his close childhood friends. At one of the final games I worked there, he called me into his owner's box and gave me beer, free food, and $1,500 to thank me for all the hard work I had done for him over the years. He told me the reason he liked me so much was because I didn't pretend to like him because of who he was. Confused, I asked him to clarify. He asked me if I seriously didn't know. I was still confused, and then he told me the truth. He was actually a Hall of Fame pitcher who played with the Cleveland Indians and Philadelphia Athletics from the 1940s to the early 1960s and even served in World War II. He showed me a replica of his Hall of Fame plaque. We laughed about it, and he further implied why he liked me so much. He passed away about a year after this, and I attended his funeral. All around, an amazing man, and I feel like such an idiot for not knowing who he was. Story 8. They have a lisp. I never noticed the lisp until my wife met him and pointed it out. Then I noticed the lisp. He slipped it by me. Story 9. A childhood best friend of mine had a mother who constantly went on vacations alone to Florida. It turns out she was actually in the psychiatric ward. Story 10. The man she claimed was harassing her actually took out a restraining order against her because she had been stalking him the entire time. This went on for years. He had video proof. It is unsettling to think how easily she lied for so many years to so many people. Story 11. It wasn't really a secret, so I don't know if it qualifies. But I have a work friend. We've known each other for years. We grab beers together and hang out outside of work from time to time. Turns out we've been in each other's orbits since birth. He mentioned his mom knowing someone I knew through my mom. We started going through contacts. We'd attended the same schools but different classes that never blended. His brother dated my cousin's best friend. We'd worked for the same companies, with one of us coming in as the other was leaving, or the company was big enough for paths to never cross. We'd lived in the same neighborhoods multiple times. We had the same favorite restaurant in one place but went on different regular days. Story 12. Not so much a secret but news to me. My roommate and I were in the United States Marine Corps together, and if you aren't married, then you must maintain a barracks room. Most people take that to mean you have to live in the barracks, but if you show up to field day and keep your room clean, you technically cannot get in trouble if you decide you don't want to stay. There all the time. My buddy was married at the time, so he had his own house off base, and after getting tired of the barracks life, I started staying at his house more and more, helping out. We were definitely friends, always had each other's backs, and had similar humor, really growing close, getting into each other's hobbies. One day, almost out of the blue, his wife left him to find herself, which was difficult because they had a child together. So, my buddy was now single and back in the barracks, almost ready to end active service, basically getting out of the United States. Mahinko. He let his now ex-wife have custody for a few months back in their home state so he could get his affairs in order, presumably to work out a custody deal. Nothing too notable happened. We had a send-off party for him, and he headed back home. I spent another 6 months to maybe a year still in. I am pretty bad at keeping in touch with people, so I figured he probably felt a little betrayed I didn't reach out much during that time. I got out and moved in with my parents. I saved quite a bit of money not having a car, mostly living in the barracks and eating at the chow hall, so I took a year off. I spent time with my family and didn't have many friends, until my buddy started reaching out. Every few months, he would say things like, "There was a really good job here, you wouldn't have to rent a place because you could stay with me, and I could stay there rent-free if I looked after his kid." At this point, he had custody every other week. He mentioned job opportunities and said I should just visit so we could hang out. I finally thought, why not? It seemed to me he was either lonely or trying to look out for me. I flew out to see his house, and then the pandemic shut down airports. I didn't have a car, so I basically became a live-in nanny, but it wasn't so bad. We were having fun and had each other's backs again. One day, we got completely drunk. It happens sometimes. But he told me something that shocked me. I am the main benefactor of his will. Here I was thinking we were just good friends, and he said, "No, you have the responsibility of making sure whatever I have is used to help my son live a good life." That hit me right in the feels. I had been the beneficiary of his will for a few years by the time he told me. Story 13. He knew American Sign Language. I had known the man for a few years. He was just a regular guy. One day, I met him for breakfast and found him deep in conversation with a deaf man. Story 14. The old neighbor was a decent man, good with the children, like a father figure to my kids. We moved after about 5 years of knowing him. I knew he had been in prison, which was not a big deal since we all have a past. It turned out he was there for sexually assaulting an 11-year-old girl who became pregnant. He has since disappeared, and nobody knows where he is. Story 15. She had been sexually assaulted by a mutual acquaintance while attending a party at his house. His wife was upstairs at the time and apparently did not realize it. Fast forward about 25 years, and he has since been divorced, remarried, and his second wife died of cancer. He messaged her the day after his second wife died to make advances toward her. Story 16. I am in my 70s. My best friend of 40 years and I were talking. She was very fond of my mother, who has been dead for many years. She said something about how much I must miss her. I did not say anything. She pushed. I finally said, "I never say this to people who liked her, but she was extremely abusive and I was greatly relieved when she died. She once threatened to cut my cat's throat." There was a long pause. She said, "Mine was too. All those years and we never shared that." That was quite a talk. It's amazing the things you hide. Story 17. I found out my now former husband was a secret drug addict after he experienced drug-induced psychosis at home. That was very difficult. Story 18. I learned that my husband was attracted to children after knowing him for 8 years, shortly after our 6th wedding anniversary. One day, I found a video, and our marriage ended immediately. I contacted the police and cooperated fully with them. He is now in prison. Story 19. I had a guy I worked with for a couple of years who became the lead singer of my best friend's band. They practiced in my garage, so he was regularly in my home. I got drunk with him many times, collaborated on work projects even after I moved on, and considered him a colleague, mentor, and friend. Then he was arrested and sent to prison for raping his 15-year-old stepdaughter, which had been happening for years, including while he was a frequent guest in my home. Story 20. That he is good friends with one of the band members from One Direction. I was shocked until he showed some of their childhood pictures together. They have been friends for a long time. Story 21. He could not hold a conversation about something he was not personally interested in. He would just nod his head and wait to change the subject. Story 22. I started therapy a while ago and confided in a friend about my childhood sexual abuse. She confided she has also been sexually assaulted, and it was by her brother. He had been living in a house owned by their mother, refusing to pay rent or let her inside, and they had been dealing with legal issues around it for years. They had just gotten him out of the house and out of their lives. I was floored. I had no idea she had been going through any of this. The things people struggle with, and you would never know because there is so much silence and shame around it. This is someone I am close to. I respect her strength even more now. Story 23. My straight male friend recently opened up to me about being sexually assaulted when he was 19. He told me he had never told anyone else what happened. I wish men had more opportunities to discuss that kind of experience when it happens to them. I am certain the only reason he told me is because I was recently raped and asked if I could talk to him about it. Story 24. Found out he can breakdance. It was a squadron Christmas party in the United States Air Force, and one of my buddies was very drunk. He pushed our commander off the dance floor and started legitimately breakdancing, doing leg scoops, head spins, handstands, and more. Typically, he is a slow-moving, barely animated character, but he became much more lively after the alcohol took effect. Story 25. My multi-year friends with benefits and I had many deep conversations, and I thought I knew her pretty well. So, when I found out she was a married politician from a neighboring state, I was surprised. Story 26. Most of my friends have tried to get with one of my exes over the years. Story 27. My friend was a heavily abused child with debilitating mental health issues. Not only was he sexually abused by multiple men and women, he was physically abused and tortured, breaking multiple growth plates. He was projected to be 6 feet 1 inch tall but ended up being 5 feet 7 inches. He had scars down his back and, when we asked him, he would make up hilarious and very unlikely stories about how he got them. It is sad to know we laughed at his childhood trauma. He unfortunately died by suicide at the age of 21. It is heartbreaking, and I wished I had comforted him more and let him know that he was never broken. The people who hurt him were. Story 28. I had a very close friend growing up from a big family. He was the oldest brother of 6 kids. I never saw anything wrong but definitely remember some weird vibes during sleepovers. We lost contact after high school but reconnected during the pandemic. His family was having a barbecue one day, and I was sitting with him in his car, hanging out, smoking, and listening to music. One of his sisters came to the window and made a really overtly sexual joke to him. He looked over at me as if checking whether I heard it. He said something like, "You're nasty, get away from me." And she replied, "That never stopped you before." Story 29. I found out after years of friendship that my friend had been taking photos of me while I slept at sleepovers. It turns out they had an entire album titled Dreaming, with pictures of me in various sleep poses. I am no longer friends with him. Story 30. I recently found out that one of my good friends is really rich, like comes from old money rich. She has the biggest heart and is incredibly sweet and down to earth, so I would have never known. It wasn't until she got married that I started to piece it together. Where are you having your bachelorette party? Oh, my family has a condo in Florida that we've had since before I was born. We're just gonna chill there for a week. Where is the wedding? "Oh, my dad is part of a club, so we're just going to have it there." I looked up the club and saw that there is a dress code just to walk into the building, and it costs a couple $100 a month to be a member. At the cocktail hour, there was a glass vase with pretty birds on it, so I took a look. There was a plaque inside that said it was donated to the club and was made in the 1700s. Priceless art that could be seen at the Metropolitan Museum of Art on display in this club as decoration. So yeah, had no idea. In hindsight, when she got her master's in education from an expensive university, I should have gotten the hint. But I mean it when I say she's a really phenomenal person. One of the biggest hearts you'll ever know. Just a gem of a human being. Story 31. Finding out she never really liked me was painful. She would laugh with others about whatever I told her in confidence. We had our first babies only a few months apart. It broke my heart more than any man could. Story 32. I knew my best friend for about 20 years before I found out that his sons were not actually his biological children. His ex-wife cheated on him, and both children had different fathers. However, he loves them and considers them his sons. Story 33. I'm still not 100% certain about this, but I know something is there. I have a friend who is really smart, in good shape, good-looking, and very personable. He has one of those postures and builds like someone who has been in the military for a long time. I've known him for over 10 years, closer to 15, and I've never once heard him mention anything about the military. In fact, he is very against the military. Every person we run into randomly who is in the military always asks about his service, to which he says he never served but would have loved to. He has one of those khaki-colored baseball caps with an American flag Velcro patch in his room that looks like it has been worn a lot. He said a friend who did some tours in Iraq while wearing it gave it to him. He also has some challenge coins I've seen which he said his friends gave him. The thing is, we're close, we have a tight-knit group of friends, and we have never met any of these military friends. There is a period of his life before me and people in our group met him that seems unaccounted for. From after high school for about 10 years, there aren't any people who knew him then. I have a very high suspicion that he was involved in the military or maybe still is in some capacity that he either isn't allowed to say or decided to forget about. He has a tattoo that was lasered off. He said it was a stupid tattoo of a cartoon named Battletoads. That sounds believable, but he has other tattoos that are also pretty silly that he has never removed. He even has a misspelled one. I recently found out that they call Navy SEALs frogmen. Is it a coincidence that he had a tattoo of a battletoad removed? I asked him about it once while drinking, and he laughed and said he wishes he was that interesting. But there are so many signs. Also, he is fearless and can defuse any situation and eventually befriend even the scariest and meanest guys. Not sure what to make of it, but I'm certain there's some pretty cool story that can't be talked about for whatever reason. Story 34. Not exactly a secret as something not shared, but twice now I have learned a male friend I assumed was straight was bisexual. In both cases I thought, oh cool, that is new information, and never brought it up again. Men tend not to talk about relationships at all unless asked. Story 35. My partner just randomly started juggling when we had friends over a couple of months ago. I never knew they could juggle. We have been together for over 10 years. Story 36. My mother was married to a famous drummer before she started dating my father. This explains why my father always got mad when I told him I wanted to become a drummer. Story 37. I learned that my friend was a psychopath. I knew him as passionate, fun, a bit eccentric, but overall a good guy. Then he suddenly took a journalist out sailing in his submarine, tortured her, killed her, cut her up, and threw her overboard. Story 38. My very handsome gay friend has been intimate with half or more of our friend group discreetly. I don't care, but it absolutely blew my mind. Story 39. My ex-best friend cheated on her ex-girlfriend with a man. But the secret is that she also cheated on her with a friend and her sister. The three of them were intimate in hotels while the boyfriend of the friend watched and touched himself. They did this even during a vacation that the original girlfriend fully paid for everyone. Imagine that. You pay for a vacation for your girlfriend, her male friend, her girlfriend, the girlfriend's sister, and the boyfriend of the girlfriend, only to find them all intoxicated and intimate in the hotel room you paid for. Story 40. One of my best friends faked an olive allergy for about 15 years. Someone exposed him at his birthday, and he started panicking and yelling about blowing his cover of just not liking olives. We all laughed at him, and I was going to use that against him as long as I could. That was at the end of May. He passed away suddenly 2 weeks ago, so I did not get to use it against him much. Story 41. I did not know until they died, after being friends for 7 years, that they were a severe cocaine addict. I had no idea they even used drugs. Story 42. I met my best friend when we were both 20, and her boyfriend was 28. They had been together for 4 years before that. They broke up last year after 11 years together. Even though I always found the age gap unusual, he seemed like a decent person over the years I knew him. It was not until she was hiding at my house from him after their breakup that I learned how bad it was. The sexual abuse, financial abuse, emotional abuse, and physical abuse, it was horrible. All those years she kept it hidden so well that no one noticed. She has managed to rebuild her life, but I will never forget the things she finally told me. The isolation and hopelessness. Thank goodness they did not have children. Story 43. I recently discovered that a very good friend of mine, whom I have known for about 11 years, had a security clearance several levels higher than the President of the United States. He retired from Sandia National Laboratories and, prior to that, was in the Navy working for the Department of Naval Intelligence. To clarify, I knew all of this. I just had no idea to what extent. Story 44. My best friend from college. I did not have much of a family life. My parents died, one in high school and one a few years later in a mental institution after 15 failed suicide attempts. He took me home one holiday, and his mother and stepfather became like family. For 20 years, they essentially were family, holidays, barbecues, and so on. My friend, his actual siblings, and I all became close. My children know them as uncles, and they also understand that they are not related by blood. A few years ago, the stepfather, who was more like a dad to me than anyone I had ever known, suddenly died. Then the skeletons started coming out. Among other things, he had not one, not two, but 3 former families with several other children and grandchildren. What little was in his trust quickly disappeared, starting a snowball effect of turmoil. He was significantly older than the mother, old enough that his oldest child from his first marriage was actually a few years older than her. He also claimed to have a wealthy lifestyle from retirements and a golden parachute from some business dealings many years ago. It turned out to be a house of cards built on lies and various scams. The mother was living off an early inheritance from her father, who died around the same time, and an unfathomable amount of credit card debt. Her siblings realized she had been draining their dad's resources for years. Between all the lies and the mentality of, if I ignore these problems, they will go away, it turned into a nightmare. The 2 siblings and I still talk, and our families hang out from time to time. But to me, almost half my life and people I looked up to and respected were all fake, just evaporated due to people being lazy liars and running from their obligations. Story 45. She was using me to gain access to my life so she could live it and exclude me. Story 46. I had a friend whom I had known quite closely for years. She had a variety of ailments ranging from celiac disease to autism. I would also accommodate her ailments, making sure there was no gluten and taking her to places where she would not experience sensory overload. I was not offended if she wanted to go home early or be left alone. I was a shoulder to cry on when she could not get pregnant because of her polycystic ovary syndrome. I was patient with her attention deficit hyperactivity disorder. Turns out she was faking it all. To this day, I am not sure why she would do this, but I think it was a form of attention-seeking and possibly narcissistic behavior. Story 47. They had been struggling with being a bot online for years. Story 48. A close friend had her marriage end when she was caught having an online affair. I was supportive without being judgmental. I do not know the full picture, and both parties have a lot going on and are difficult to handle. I recently found out that the person she had an affair with was almost certainly, though not completely sure, a minor at the time. It was online, so whether she knew or not is up for debate, but the more I think about it, the more I doubt everything she says now. Story 49. The individual expressed a strong preference for intimate acts involving various parts of their body. Story 50. She was homophobic. I had a friend for over 20 years. She supported me when I came out at 32. She met my partner and loved her. She was a great friend. Then I went back to court to get custody of my children changed, and she sent me a 5-paragraph email telling me that I have no right to my children because I will raise them in my lifestyle, and they do not need to be exposed to that. She also said I need to grow up and realize that having someone who is gay as a parent will get them bullied. So I need to find a nice man and put my lifestyle aside for the sake of my kids. It went on, but that is the gist. It was vile, full of name-calling and homophobic dog whistles. I was so heartbroken. This was my best friend of 20 years, and she wrote me a horrible and disgusting email. She ruined our friendship. Cutting her off was like losing a limb, and it took me months to get through it. It has been 14 years, and it still hurts. I check on her through social media sometimes, but I have her blocked everywhere else. Story 51. That my mother had a one-night encounter with James Brown and kept her receipts to prove it. Story 52. My brother-in-law's father was a God-fearing Southern Christian man. Very evangelical, family-first, salt-of-the-earth kind of guy. When he passed away, not only did they discover logs of online conversations with gay men, but he had also written extremely popular gay erotica. To say our minds were blown is an understatement. As far as I know, it has never been discussed again. Story 53. Finding out they never actually considered me a close friend, and I was just someone to hang out with when they did not have anything better to do or needed money. Story 54. He writes romance and adult novels under a pseudonym. He moved to a different country and was secretive about his occupation. I visited him and he had a really nice apartment. I thought, his parents must have money. Then I asked why he had 5 framed pictures of an English woman's adult novels, and he revealed the truth. As a joke, I decided to read one, got 2 chapters in, and texted him, "You have some issues, man. Great guy though." Story 55. I found out at her funeral when I was in my late 40s that my grandmother worked on the Manhattan Project as one of General Leslie Grove's secretaries, what we would call an administrative assistant today at Los Alamos, and before that as a human calculator. It has been almost 10 years, and I am still upset with her because I am very interested in World War II. And she lied to me when I asked her what she did during the war when I was a child. She said she worked in a hospital, which made sense because her first husband was a doctor. Technically, she was my step-grandmother, but she married my grandfather long before I was born, and my biological grandmother died when my father was a teenager. Story 56. She was a nationally ranked baton twirler. I had no idea that was even a thing until a friend I had known for years approached some people doing fire spinning and asked to try their fire staff. Absolutely mind-blowing. Story 57. Knew him for 20 years when he told me he had been sexually assaulted by a family friend. He never told the parents, and the friend would still be invited over. That had to have been so traumatic. Story 58. After my grandfather who raised me died last year, I learned he had killed someone. Story 59. I have been married for 17 years. One day, my husband's mother came over and said, "Here, I cleaned out your room. Take your violin." He then proceeded to play Minuet in G. I had never seen my husband play before. He had never even mentioned it. Story 60. When my best friend told me she had been molested as a child, I was heartbroken and angry for her. No one deserves that. Story 61. After years of on and off with my ex, it all finally exploded. I caught proof of her cheating, which also led to the nasty truth that multiple people within the friend group were aware of the cheating and never told me. Some even helped her facilitate her escapades at times. For example, we were at a house party and, out of nowhere, my ex started getting an attitude with me over seemingly nothing. One of the other girls in the group backed her up very aggressively. Everybody was kind of confused. The 2 of them ended up leaving after my ex made a hurtful comment about my sister being a prostitute because she worked as a bartender at a strip club. We had all been drinking, so I just chalked it up to that, since she was an angry drunk at times. I later found out they picked the fight intentionally so they could both leave and meet up with some men at a bar 45 minutes away. There were multiple instances like this that I learned about after the fact. But the real kicker, when she was on vacation with the family for a family reunion, she cheated on me with her cousin. Story 62. He lost his virginity to my long-term girlfriend, whom I later married 4 years after and divorced 18 months after the marriage. He told me after the divorce. Story 63. She was a raging person and a manipulator. Not your average manipulator. She would do things just to upset people, then get mad at them for being upset and post online about how bad the other person was, trying to get people on her side. She did whatever it took. It was terrible. I stayed friends with her for about 15 years and finally got her out of my life. 15 years. Story 64. In high school, I had a close group of friends. 4 of us. We were very close from 2015 to 2022 until one of us, let's call him Kyle, randomly blocked all of us. He also got his parents and family, whom we had spent countless years around, to do the same. This was completely out of the blue. A few months later, we found out that Kyle had tried messaging one friend's little sister, who was 13 at the time while Kyle was 18. Of course, he knew who she was. Parents and police got involved, and it turned out he had done this to countless girls. The worst part is that none of us had any idea what he was really like. I look back and thank God that he didn't do anything else and cut off contact with us. Story 65. My friend was a catfish. This was back in the early days of the internet. I bonded with someone on LiveJournal and introduced her to a few of my real-life friends. We had a very tight-knit group of people. We sent presents in the mail, talked on the phone, and stayed in touch for a few years. One day, one of these very close friends just deleted everything. We were really worried and kept calling on the phone. Eventually, it came out that the person we had come to call a friend wasn't quite real. The person was real enough but was a very casual internet user. Her roommate decided to take over and roleplay her life online because her own life was boring or she had issues. Who knows? The roommate had made friends with all of us but eventually felt some guilt over it. Coincidentally, this was also the time when the roommate was caught stealing the friend's credit cards. This was maybe 15 years ago. I've gotten to know the friend for real and she is a cool person. To this day, I'm not sure what parts of what I know are real and what were made up. I also don't know what happened to the roommate. Even though she was a serial liar, I thought she was a friend for a long time. I hope the roommate has gotten the help she desperately needed. It absolutely affected my ability to trust people, and I'm still working on that. Story 66. Why are half of these comments from automated accounts? The dead internet theory is true. Story 67. I recently found out that my mother's father, my adored grandfather, abused my mother when she was in her early teens. I have been estranged from my mother for at least 5 years now by choice. I have family who still communicate with her, and I just discovered this information about 2 weeks ago. It was pretty shocking. I was forced to maintain communication with my grandfather. He never touched me, thankfully, but he would make comments about how I looked. Story 68. They were direct relatives of Adolf Hitler. At the same time, they held the title of Count in Bavaria, and what I thought was their surname was only the second of 6 names. Story 69. She shoplifts, which is inappropriate. She is retired and inherited a few $1,000,000 from her parents. Story 70. My best friend in high school told me years after we graduated that her household was far more dysfunctional and horrible than I realized. She said all the time she spent at my house and with my family was a real lifesaver for her. Story 71. My best friend of 20 years had a secret obsession with my ex the entire time we were married. I recently found out that they slept together, possibly multiple times. Story 72. I had been married to my husband for 10 years before I knew he could play the drums really well, by the way. I am a musician, so I was really surprised he never mentioned it. Story 73. My friend and I attended the same college at the same time, but did not meet until after graduation. Over the years, we learned we had many friends in common and had been with them at many of the same parties and events. His boss of 2 years was my lifelong best friend. His best friends from home, 2 brothers, were guys I knew fairly well. However, we had never crossed paths and did not even recognize each other. Story 74. I made friends with this person in the ninth grade, and we stayed friends until we were 46 years old. We went through periods of less frequent contact sometimes, but never for long, and I always considered him to be one of my dearest friends. When we were both 46, he suddenly disappeared. I didn't think much of it at first, but when I hadn't heard back from him after a couple of months, I became worried and contacted his mother to see if he was okay. His sister eventually told me what was going on. He hadn't responded to my messages because he was awaiting his trial for child exploitation material. He had hundreds of images and videos that he had been collecting for years. He ended up going to prison, serving a little over 2 years, and is now on the sex offender registry, likely for life. I thought that I really knew him, but I was very wrong. The person I thought I knew would never have kept such a collection. It made me question my judgment of people and wonder what other awful things I might be missing about others. Story 75. A very dear friend gave her son up for adoption. I had no idea until her sister told me. I was very angry at the sister for revealing a secret that was not hers to share. I acted calm and did not acknowledge that I had heard what she said, never once bringing it up. After about 5 years, my friend told me about the adoption. I pretended it was the first time I had heard of it. To this day, she does not know how wrong her sister was for sharing a secret that was not hers to share. If someone tells you something in confidence, keep it to yourself. Story 76. I found out after years of being friends with Chris that he used to be married. We were having a casual conversation over coffee when he mentioned his former wife. I was so shocked that I almost spilled my drink. I had no idea he had ever been married, let alone gone through a divorce. He told me that he got married young, and they ended up splitting amicably. He never really talked about it because it was not a part of his life he felt defined him anymore. It was such a surprise because he has always been so private, and I realized there were whole parts of his life I did not know about. Story 77. One of my friends has a criminal record for organized crime. Apparently, some friends had an idea that did not work. He proposed a new approach and helped those people succeed by coordinating. However, the police were watching the whole thing from a distance and arrested everyone involved, including my friend. Story 78. I was very close friends with this person from my college who I eventually found out came from an old money billionaire family. I had no clue until I went to her house and she gradually revealed some details over time. She was extremely down to earth, humble, and a very kind person. She was not lavish in how she dressed or presented herself, so I guess it was not very obvious. Story 79. Comes from a very wealthy family with servants, homes, and vacation homes, yes, plural. I never knew. There were no signs of it. She lived a regular life like the rest of us in university and even after graduation. The only clue was that she didn't have a part-time job, but she was not alone in that regard. Story 80. My childhood friend was emotionally abusive. It was how her family treated her, and I knew all the details because she confided in me and I always gave her advice on how to deal with them. Then I moved in with her, and the way she treated me changed within several months. It was like once she got me and knew I wasn't going anywhere, I didn't matter anymore. She became a different person. Once kind, generous, and thoughtful, she then refused to inconvenience herself for me despite all the help and favors I still did for her, until she took it too far, and then suddenly it was like a switch flipped and she was her old kind-hearted self again. Several months later, the cycle repeated, and I saw it for what it was. When confronted, she told me that because her family treated her that way, it was only fair for her to treat me the same way. I got out and we haven't spoken in a long time. It still hurts, and I still love her. Wish her the best, and hope she gets into a better situation with her family and mindset. But I can't help her anymore. Once she started hurting me on purpose, I had to leave to protect myself and create some distance. I have a much better understanding now of how people end up in abusive relationships, both romantic and otherwise. If you have no direct experience with it personally like I did, it's easy for the abuse to escalate gradually. It was a very confusing Jekyll and Hyde situation until I realized what was happening. Fortunately, I wasn't raised that way, and I don't tolerate being treated that way by anyone. The very concept of paying it forward with abuse goes against my entire moral code as a person. Story 81. My best friend was my husband and the father of our 4 children. He failed to mention he was a pedophile. No wonder he loved my flat chest. When we divorced, I realized that all the assets were in his name, and all the debts were in mine. This was after he withdrew all the money from the personal and business bank accounts, closed them, and fled the country. He vacationed in Spain, stayed with his brother in England after attending his old friend's wedding in New York, then returned home and sued me for all the money he took. I was with him for 30 years and cared for him for 10 years after surgery and radiation for brain cancer. I was doing everything for him at the time he left. He acted like he couldn't do anything. It turns out he was quite capable of evil despite being considered 100% disabled. He used his illness in the divorce and wanted 70% of the assets because of his disability. He was a psychopath. I have not dated since the divorce 10 years ago. I had a lot to process and heal from. Story 82. Pretty tame story. I used to be a magician. While performing, I had a friend I often hung out with to play guitar. He knew I was a magician and even helped me work out logistics for some stage tricks. After 5 years of friendship, one day I opened the closet in his room and it was completely full of juggling gear, torches, axes, bowling pins, knives, and more. I had no idea he could juggle. How could you be friends with a magician and never mention you're into juggling? It still baffles me every time I remember. Story 83. After several years, I found out he was from Texas, a vegan, and did CrossFit. I never had a clue. Story 84. We recently learned that my grandmother gave up a baby for adoption in her early 20s, before she met my grandfather. She passed away a few years ago, but we have since found him and are all getting to know each other. It is pretty cool. I feel so bad for what my grandmother went through. When she found out she was pregnant, her boyfriend left her and her parents kicked her out of the house. Story 85. One of my closest friends, whom I have known all my life, never shows emotions and is incredibly stoic to the point that it seems like he does not have feelings at all. Ending relationships and family dying do not affect him at all. I am a very emotional person and quite the opposite in that regard. He told me that it is really hard for him because he feels like he is supposed to feel something but just does not. Story 86. I had a grandfather figure, but not by blood. I worked as a dishwasher in an Italian deli and restaurant, similar to the setting in the movie Goodfellas. He was the owner and looked as much like a mobster as anyone could. I knew where he was every moment of the day, as well as almost every phone call he received. He was not a mobster and hated everything related to the mob. Customers would come in and speculate about him. He eventually sold me the business after running it for 38 years, and I continued for 27 years. He died in the late 1990s. A book was published a few years ago by his nephew revealing the family secret. His father and uncle were involved in the mob in Colorado and were killed when he was 17. He moved to California with his mother and brother to start a new life without crime. He took that secret to his grave. Story 87. I was good friends with a woman for many years before I found out her husband was an abusive alcoholic. They kept it very quiet. It is really sad. Story 88. That, just like me, she had a traumatic childhood. I had not told her about mine, and she did not tell me about hers until we had been friends for almost 2 decades. Story 89. When I was a kid in the 1990s, a neighbor 2 doors down was always being overly dramatic and asking us kids to slow down on our mopeds, go-karts, dirt bikes, and so on, in a way that was hilarious. It was not until years later that I found out she was a popular comedian, author, and actor. She wrote one of my favorite books, Fried Green Tomatoes. On the other side of us, a few more doors down, lived another author of a famous book and movie. He was always at our house and left a book with a cover I thought was really funny. A year or 2 later, Tom Hanks played the lead and gave us some of the best quotes I still hear today. Story 90. My cousin died. Driving home, a woman on the wrong side of the road collided with him. She was intoxicated and survived, but he did not. He was in a different state, working after earning his degree and ensuring he could provide for his son, though he was alone there. After his passing, I have seen an outpouring of support from famous and celebrity people matching his impact. He was deeply loved. He accomplished so much. Most of what we know came after his death because he was not the type to brag or gloat. He worked hard, encouraged those around him, and made anyone he could laugh. I knew my cousin, and the void he left in my life will forever inspire me to be better. Story 91. We recognized my husband's coworker on an old episode of Dateline. She was involved in a major disaster, which I cannot name because it would be very recognizable. We cannot ask her about it either, as it would be too rude to ask someone to talk about their trauma from the worst experience they have ever had. I really wish I could ask her, though. Story 92. Not as serious as some of the others here, but my best friend only learned I did not like steak after almost 10 years of friendship. Every time I went to their house, they gave me steak sandwiches. Most of the time, it was just a coincidence that they had it when I visited. I never kept it a secret that I did not like steak, but I never specifically told her either. Story 93. After my childhood best friend died from a heroin overdose, I learned that when we were in middle school, she discovered the man she thought was her father was not her father. Somehow, her grandmother revealed the truth about why her mother rushed to marry the man she believed was her father. Her mother was already pregnant, and when she met him, she convinced him the baby was his so they would marry. That, in itself, is a horrible thing to find out. Later, my friend discovered that her mother was trafficked in her home country, which led to the pregnancy and her fleeing to the United States. I found this out after my friend had passed, from her sister who told me at the funeral. My friend was such a happy person, but I always knew she was a little lost. Story 94. My best friend of 17 years became extremely jealous of my healthy romantic relationship and turned out to be narcissistic and abusive. She used my grandfather's death as an excuse to reach out and tell me I am a horrible person. She is no longer in my life. Story 95. One of my best friends was a total Patrick Bateman. I am simply not their facade. Except she was a total coward, so she was not dangerous like he hypothetically was. In hindsight, our other best friend and I missed or ignored a lot of red flags. But man, we have been had. Everything we thought we liked about her was a front. After I ended our friendship, people came out of the woodwork to tell me egregious and deceitful things she had done. She did something terrible to me that I would rather not talk about. When she finally got the nerve to ask our other best friend, with whom we were a little trio of besties, if she still liked her, she opened by saying she had no regrets about what she did to me. Virtually everything about the person I thought I knew was fake, either her mirroring one of us or her pretending to be what we wanted to see. I think she got comfortable and decided we would accept whatever bad behavior she wanted to show without question because she was one of us. I am shocked. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.